Ahem. All right. Cora horrors never forget. Rebellions are built on hope. Nice. My partner gave that to me. Thank you, Winter. I do love it. I haven't had a chance to put it on my car somewhere prominent yet, but I'm excited. Oh, it is another week, and let me tell you, it was wow, quite a week. I went to Arizona. I came back. I met up with a friend down in Arizona. I won't tell you any more details. I muted myself just now. And I visited with some friends, visited with my colleagues, visited with some Cora whores down in Arizona. We are everywhere. We godless are everywhere. Anyways, we're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about the Daily Wire. We're going to talk about Matt Walsh. But first, we're going to get a chance for all these Cora whores to get in here so we can talk about how charlatans never change. I want to remind you all, we're going to do things a little bit differently today, but because it is Friday, it is Giving Friday, which means if you want to help keep the work going, we would ask you to go to corahor.org/give. Just go to corahor.org and click on give. It's the first link that comes up, which is our donation box to give to the unsheltered and to people who are shelter insecure. We are currently running missions up to Salt Lake City, Utah to serve the unsheltered, and also down here in southern Utah in what is known as Hilldale or Colorado City. That is the former Warren Jeffs polygamist cult, the FLDS. Their survivors have some limited resources down there. And we have been donated to an organization unofficially by the name of Cherish Families. And it was founded by a woman who was closely associated into the polygamist community, or at least it's operated. Their operations down there are being operated by women who are close to the community, well trusted in the community. They do everything from providing women down there with financial training and job training and things like this, helping them to restart their lives after polygamy. And that's a great, wonderful service. Hello, how you doing? Lisa, waiting for the snow. I don't think I know where you are, Lisa, but that's cool, man. That's cool. So we are going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about Matt Walsh. I just want to remind you all that we are doing this godless mission to benefit people who are unsheltered or who are shelter insecure, including down in Colorado City. I want to thank, last week, we got a total of $75 into our donation box. And I would love to say that was from a whole bunch of people who gave $5 like I asked. It wasn't. It was the same usual people, and I want to thank you for donating. In one case, $50, in another case, $25. If you go to corahor.org/give and you donate, that money doesn't go to me. That money doesn't go to the church. That money, well, the money goes to the church, but then it goes out to the missions. But then somebody used our Amazon link. I believe this happened when I went on Kirsten and Megan's program, and they have a big audience, much bigger than ours. That's offensive. That's offensive. But and I got snarky about Cora Horde this Monday. Whatever. Someone named Chris, love you, Chris, whoever you are. Not really sure who Chris is, but someone named Chris apparently gave us, because that's what it says here on the note, sent us, was able to order through our Amazon list a whole box of 25 emergency blankets. And these blankets are coming with me to Salt Lake City tomorrow. They're going right out to the streets with pocket warmers that I personally purchased. So the work goes on. We are helping people who are like Cora whores. Matter of fact, they should have loaded Cora whore for the like Cora whore for the opening hymn, but you know, I can't do it because we missed our Charlatans Never Change this week, and I'd been working on a really good one, and then all of a sudden, this Matt Walsh thing landed in my lap, and I said, you know what? Screw it. Screw it. I'm going after some bigger fish, you guys. These Mormons can have a break. I'm going after a big fish here. I want to skewer one right through the reputation, metaphorically speaking, of one Matt Walsh. He's the guy who made such documentaries as What is a Woman and Am I Racist? The answer is yes. The question is not, is Matt Walsh racist? The question is Matt Walsh the most racist? We're taking this Catholic down a peg because we have to remember, friends, charlatans never change.
Top goes up, preacher works the street. Come find Jesus at the meet and greet. Sell you heaven, then shake you from their feet. They'll cure every ill, make the blind to see. Uncle Sam don't see a thing, 'cause charlatans never change. Soothsaying in that holy name, fools burned in holy flame. Oh, charlatans never change. They'll cure your gout. Pass the plate, take a pass on down, 'cause charlatans never change. Soothsaying in that holy name, fools burned in holy flame. Oh, charlatans never change. A golden throne, sow your seed, reap what you've sown. Hung over in Jesus' tent, refill your wallet, Sunday comes again. 'Cause charlatans never change. Soothsaying in that holy name, fools burned in holy flame. Oh, charlatans never change.
My friends, when the racists send us their racists, they don't send their best. Check out the comments. They don't send us their best. They send all the flunkies. You see, if you are a fan of Matt Walsh, chances are that you are a male, almost certainly, between the ages of 13 and 33, that has only one thing in common with every other Matt Walsh fan out there, and that is that never done had a woman touch the pee-pee. Never going to have a woman touch the pee-pee. And I feel for you. Like, have you heard of the touch of the pee-pee? Because the touch of the pee-pee is one of the wonderful things in life. But that's, I get it. You're not, look, you can just imagine, and chances are that's all you'll ever get to do, and it's fine. Just live with it. I want to show you something here. Let's see here. Min speaker view. Yes. I'm going to go ahead and take that out. We're going to go ahead and show you. This week, I decided to join the Daily Wire. Not join them as a commentator, mind you. They didn't invite me. And I am mediocre as I am as an entertainer and filmmaker. I'm not that mediocre. Because I don't know if you know about this. The Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro's The Daily Wire. That is where mediocre filmmakers and storytellers, visual storytellers, go to end their career. Mine ended on its own, just like in corporate work. But let me go ahead and show you what it looks like when you join Daily Wire. See, now the reason why I had joined the Daily Wire was well, let me take you back to the opener here. When you click on shows and movies, they're kind of like a little racist Netflix is what they are. Misogynist racist Netflix. You're going to see that there is this Pendragon cycle, The Rise of Merlin. Now, here's the thing. Post-toxic man that I am nonetheless a fanatic for Arthurian lore. That's just the way it works, you know? And so I was somewhat excited when I heard that Daily Wire was going to actually make got a contract to make the Pendragon cycle, though I have not read the Pendragon cycle. I've read lots of Arthurian lore in different versions, but my favorite, I have my favorites. Let's say that. Like I'm more of a fan of the Warlord trilogy, for example, that sort of thing. Or I love me some good old timey classics like Geoffrey of Monmouth. I like the old stories of Arthurian lore, but I could see why, you know, a racist channel built around racism would like Arthurian lore. You know, they like stories about white people. It's hard to get more white than Arthur, you know, so on and so forth. But I thought, well, maybe there's actually going to be a chance that these guys could do some service to the story of Arthur. So far that I have seen, they have released one episode of this Rise of Merlin, and it is worse than the Rise of Skywalker, and by a lot. Suffice it to say, I will soon be canceling my subscription to this awful racist channel. But I figured while I'm here, might as well catch up on everybody's favorite racists. Here they all are. And one of them is this guy, Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh has been trying to become relevant once again by being more and more racist. And I wanted to show you one of the episodes, his most recent episode from January 30th. That's today. I have been watching it, as you can see, but here's the thing. We don't need
The system.
we don't need to get our live stream taken down like we did on Sunday. So we're going to do this in the most awkward way. I am going to show you a thing. I'm going to ask you to believe that it is a thing. And then I am going to tell you what the thing is. Okay? So blame YouTube. I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you, but here it is. Basically, what you have here is Matt Walsh explaining immigration and all of its complexities. And he has this episode of the Matt Walsh Show called The Solution to the Immigration Problem That No One Is Talking About. Ooh, that's definitely going to be a complex issue, right? I mean, this man is leaning into the hard-hitting issues. I will go ahead and spare you, what is it, an hour of this crap? Yeah, an hour of him talking. He wants to do away with ITIN numbers. If you don't know, an ITIN number is how an undocumented immigrant is able to pay taxes. Without having to steal somebody's social security number. And he is suggesting if we cancel ITIN numbers, then these people won't be able to get credit to buy houses, buy cars, and things like this. And they will all just self-deport, and then there doesn't need to be any violence. It was the dumbest idea I think I've ever heard. I mean, this is whole new levels of stupid. It is ridiculously stupid. And I'll tell you exactly why. If you have not talked to your racist uncle in recent days, you may not be aware that according to the racists, undocumented immigrants come to our country and then they take up all the resources that our tax dollars pay for and pay nothing into it themselves, which is strange because the ITIN number is exactly how it is that that's the opposite of what's going on. ITIN numbers were created so that people who are undocumented in this country could still pay taxes, even though they aren't able to receive benefits. Like, you can't take your ITIN number and go in and get food stamps with it. You can't take your ITIN number and go in and file for Medicaid or Medicare. You can't get Social Security benefits. It's literally the way that everything that racist uncle likes to blabber about undocumented immigrants, whom he, she, they, it call illegals. It's exactly the reverse. They are the ones who pay taxes into a system that the rest of us pay into, us being American citizens, American persons, pay into, but we who are citizens are able to claim benefits from it. Dumbest idea, because of course the reason why it was created was so that when undocumented immigrants actually are in the country for various reasons, then there's really only mainly two, that while they are in our country, if they are here, you might as well work, you might as well pay taxes, you might as well get the things that you need to be able to survive rather than winding up unsheltered. And in order to do that, please don't steal anybody's identity. Otherwise, the only way that somebody could do all those things was by stealing somebody else's social security number, buying the social security number of a recently deceased person or what have you, and created a demand for a whole market of stolen identities. And so ITINs were created to be a way around that, to say, look, don't steal anybody's social security number, just get an ITIN number. We'd rather the government knows that you're here, knows who you are, and give you some room to say, okay, we'll go out there and work on your path to citizenship, or at least, work to survive until you can get into a situation where you can go home again to self-deport or what have you, or just work temporarily and go back, which, a little thing that nobody wants to talk about when they're somebody's racist uncle, is that that's how many people who are quote unquote undocumented immigrants or so-called illegals, that's what they actually do. They come to this country, they make money, they go home again, then they come back later. And how many of them actually just stay in America, go back? There's not hard data on that, except that we have ITIN numbers. People who come to this country and then stay with the intention to stay generally don't want the hassle of having to buy a stolen identity, don't want the hassle of trying to find employment, try to qualify for credit, try to, do all the necessaries of a financial life in America without, having to be an American citizen, because for whatever reason, the path is blocked for them. Now, remember, I've told this story before. I had a dear friend in Arizona. I had many friends in Arizona who were immigrants. I'll just say that much. I'll say that much because I lived in Arizona pretty much all my life before I was in my late 30s. And in Arizona, I knew a man from Argentina. And this man from Argentina had a wife from Argentina. He had children who are Argentine citizens, but were born here in America. Because of the 14th Amendment, they are American citizens. Also, because Argentina loves the idea of dual citizenship, as most countries do, they are also Argentine. But his wife, their mother, applied for citizenship, even though she is from Argentina, obviously, as he is. And she got citizenship, and he applied for citizenship and was denied. And he was born in Argentina, lives in America. His children are American. His wife is American. He himself not American. And he had spent, at the time, last time I had spoken to him, he had spent something like $15,000 in attorney's fees trying to apply again and again and again to become an American. And at the time, he was documented in America because a company had sponsored him for a work visa. And so but as long as he had a work visa, he could stay in the country. If he wanted to start his own business, if he got fired from that job and couldn't find another job, then he would have to be deported, separated from his own children, separated from his own wife, who are citizens of this country. And so it's like, and a lot of people don't realize this. People who are immigrants to this country with names at some point in their life were what are called visa overstayers. Most people tend to think undocumented immigrants are just one kind, people who illegally cross the border. First of all, a lot of those people who cross the border illegally just wind up going back over the border exactly the same way after they can't find work, or after work season is over, or after they just make enough money to go home again. Some stay, obviously, but it fluctuates from time period to time period. But generally speaking, somewhere between 40 and 60% of people who are at any point in time undocumented immigrants are actually visa overstayers, including some people with names Arnold Schwarzenegger is known to have been an undocumented immigrant at one point. Elon Musk and his brother had mentioned at a conference once where Elon changed the subject very quickly, that while they were working as software engineers in the United States, at one point their visas had expired and they just kept on staying here, and they were technically undocumented immigrants then. Being an undocumented immigrant, while it sounds really dirty according to the way people say it when they say illegals, it's actually a much more complex thing. And it really results from the fact that our system is so inefficient, specifically for the same reason that the ITIN number exists. Because our country benefits from labor coming in from outside the country to work in this country and pay taxes in this country, while American citizens reap the benefit of the money paid in taxes. That's why the ITIN number exists, and why it's a phenomenally stupid idea to just cancel it, hoping that the people will self-deport, when the much bigger likelihood is that they'll just get stolen identities and start working under your child or your parents or your grandparents' social security number instead. But if it was not a stupid idea, Matt Walsh wouldn't be thinking it. So that's this documentary, or this episode. Now I want to show you. Oh, so while I'm here, I was going to show you this also. So I just saved you that whole hour of watching this guy yammer on with one racist dog whistle after another. But before I go on to the thing that more pissed me off about Matt Walsh and made me dig deeper into what is this guy's angle and how is he getting this information, is I looked into his documentary. Go ahead and pull this up here. I don't know if are you familiar with this, but Matt Walsh made a documentary, or starred in a documentary called "Am I Racist?" And it's not even coming up in their own search. Did I mention yet that I don't recommend this service at all? Let's see here. I can go over to, well, maybe you just trust me on this one. He has a documentary called "Am I Racist?" I had it pulled up and then I closed my window. Well, anyways, the answer is yes. But in the thing about Matt Walsh that you got to understand, I'm just gonna switch screens here while I get another screen open. So he has this documentary, which is more or less based at the beginning of the documentary around an interview that he did, a group that he crashed of anti-racist training. And this woman comes in and she talks about what is racism. She is a Black woman. She is qualified to teach this. It does appear by the people who are attending the meeting and the woman herself who's conducting the meeting that she knows what she's talking about. She does appear to be quite good at doing this. She's carrying on an anti-racism seminar, and the people who are attending, who are primarily white people, they seem very interested and engaged, and they seem like the type. You have a guy who's very obviously Jewish, and yet he is appears to be a upper middle class American who dresses in such a way as to suggest that he is liberal probably comes from a part of the country where people are liberal, etc. They specifically have cast people by look, by personality, and by interest in this meeting. And I say casting for this reason. You say, Joe, this is just a meeting. He's just crashing somebody's anti-racism training meeting, right? No. Sorry, getting my first look at the comments in a minute here. Well, no. If you look at the actual meeting that's being held, you'll see that there's a sound guy hanging out in the corner of the room with with what's called a boom pole. Right? It's a long pole. You've seen them. You've seen people making movies, right? And a microphone at the end of it. He's got headphones on, like so, and he's got a mixer and recorder down at his hip. This is a professional. This is a professional video shoot. How many times have you been down to the community center and they're doing an anti-racist training? First of all, how many times have you done that? And gone in there and found there's people standing there recording whoever's talking with a guy with a boom pole and a microphone. So this is what the long short of it is. I'll spare you the research on it. I did a basic level of Reddit slash chat GPT slash Google and double verify images, videos, recordings, and things to basically come down to this. The people who were invited to this meeting really did believe, were told that they were going to be attending a meeting to learn about how to not be racist and how to fight racism, even if you don't think that you are racist, and were excited to go to that meeting. They were told that it was going to be filmed, obviously, and they were told that the woman who was running the meeting is also an expert, and she was brought in for that purpose. Sorry. I promised that I would make sure that that's not an emergency. The They were told to come. They would come to the meeting. They were probably paid. I didn't find any confirmation that they were paid to come to the meeting. But generally speaking, if you're doing something like this in the business, in video production as a business, you pay people even if they're going to be extras. Usually a going rate. I'm not going to speak to the area where this was filmed. I can tell you in places like Arizona, Utah, California that I have worked in, a going rate would be like $100 if you just sit in the room for a couple hours, $150 to $200 if you were going to sit there for a couple of hours and speak during the meeting and possibly speak during the meeting, unless of course you were cast because you were union and the agent was union, in which case chances are at minimum you were going to get paid about $600 for a day if you showed up at all. And there would have to be some forms filled out to describe exactly how the film was going to be used and what the royalty payments would be if they, et cetera. And generally speaking, they don't do that. So generally you're looking at non-union people who are not actors, but who responded to like a Craigslist ad and told you'll be compensated for your time. And generally somebody throws them couple hundred bucks. The DEI instructor slash anti-racism instructor very likely was paid her going rate or even paid more. Because obviously every person, in order for them to release this documentary, and this is where Daily Wire actually has upped its game, upped the whole racist content game. They do appear to have their ducks in a row in terms of the actual producers they're hiring production companies who know how to make sure that this grassroots looking AstroTurf experiences that they are having have people in them who have all signed, are either in a public area, on a city street, in a city and state where there is actual laws saying if you're on the streets and somebody's filming on the street, you're in their movie and they don't owe you anything. You have agreed to be in their film by being there. That's common, for example, places like Los Angeles and New York. They're basically laws that say, look, we can't stop them from filming. If you're out in public, they're filming in public. Well, that's just what happens. And a lot of places are like that. But if you're in a closed door meeting like that, some producer has to actually go to every single person and say, we need you to sign off that you're going to let us use your image and likeness in the film and also in promotions for the film. And most people in that moment are going to go, I don't see why I have to sign a release if I don't like signing something. All of that, if you are spending somebody else's money, this is a video production 101. There's a reason why I say these guys, Daily Wire is the place where professionals in the video business go to end their careers. These guys have done this before. And if you are burning somebody else's money through the money hose, you make damn sure that before the first camera comes out of a bag and goes on a set of sticks onto a tripod, that every person that you need to be in that room is going to be in that room. They are in wardrobe, they are in makeup, and they know what they are going to do and say, and they have signed a release saying not only that we can use your image and likeness in the film, but we can use it for promotions. Otherwise, that person doesn't get paid. That person doesn't get invited. You move on to somebody else who is willing to sign and get paid. And, and then once they're paid, well, then the philosophy of some sketchy persons is, well, we paid you, so we get to use you how we want. And the people in this meeting feel very abused. They were like, I did not agree to be in a film like this. The same is true about the film, about all the people who were interviewed in the movie What is a Woman? A lot of those people have since come out to complain, say, we were misled about what the documentary was. There were important parts of what I had to say that they cut out. This is the way that tricky journalism like this, fake documentaries, are actually made. So that's what Matt Walsh and his crew get up to. And it makes sense that they do. If they didn't, they wouldn't make any content like this. Now, What is a Woman? Their first documentary, not met with critical acclaim, not exactly an Academy Award winner, and frankly, not a very good film. However, there are lots of incels in the world, and they made sure to see the movie 2 or 3 times. Financially, huge success. For a small documentary like it was, fantastic success, in terms of being a moneymaker. Again, it was full of lies. They lied and lied. They would get the narrative. They would tell the narrative their own way, and then they would splice in cuts, little pieces from the interviews that they did, where they provoked a person into giving a soundbite, give a soundbite, give a soundbite, give a soundbite. Yeah, but what about this? Yeah, but what about that? Yeah, but what about this? And then the parts that they actually provoked them to say, then they would take just that clip and put it in there to try and build on the narrative that they were already building with the voiceover. And that's how these documentaries get made. It was trash, but it didn't matter because the groypers and incels who like Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson and these guys, they don't care if it's true. Truth is not high on their list. That's why these guys pay, monthly, and then pay huge fees to go and sit in a room, in an auditorium with these people, only to find out that they've basically gone to church. They go to hear about culture, and they go to hear about conservatism, or they go to hear about life skills or what have you, and wind up with a 2 or 3 hour lecture on God, and end up with a sermon about God. And it's absurd because it's just another religion. Basically, you are part of another religion when you follow Daily Wire and when you follow their creators. So anyway, I wanted to show you. So that's how these documentaries get made. Now, you'll notice that it has been a little while since Matt Walsh came out with a documentary that people have seen, that you'll see in a movie theater. Am I Racist? The documentary they followed up with, what happened was they brought these people into a room, and all these people have clearly been paid to be there. They've been typecast to represent everything that Matt Walsh's followers think are people who want to defeat their racism, or people who want to be aware of racism, people who are woke. And they are then goaded into a position where Matt Walsh basically sits there, walks in, pretends that his name is Steven. He, at this point in the film, hasn't put on any disguise. He just looks like him, and he actually plays up, fumbling over his own name, saying that I am Steven. So he makes it clear that's not his name, and he's nervous about it. And he is, of all the people in there, the only one who's looking like he is not an actor who is actually trying to act. He is hamming it up. And then, of course, as soon as he starts interrupting frequently, the woman conducting the meeting, who is apparently not told right from the get-go, that guy is Matt Walsh. He's from the Daily Wire. He is the guy who's actually the host of the documentary. She has to ask him several times, please, let's not interrupt the other people in the group. Please, if you could not, I just ask you not to interrupt. And he is being a disruptive influence, and then saying things that are deliberately inflammatory, meant to straw man, people who believe that racism is bad, by simply making the case that he himself hates his racism, and then winds up saying something super racist like, I happen to have 17 black friends that don't like to brag, things like this. So he says these deliberately white supremacist things and couches them in the kind of performative anti-racism that is common to a lot of people who think that they are not racist in this country, and around the world. And I promise we're about to get into some actual useful information. But am I racist was pretty much what he winds up at one point. He ends up being invited, said, look, there's a room set aside here in the building, which they're in a studio. There's obviously a room next door. It's like a green room. That's where you go to get ready to get into the studio, or when you're not in the studio, where you go and you relax, until you're called to your mark. And they tell him, look, if you can't stop being disruptive to the meeting, maybe you should go to the next room. And so he eventually says, well, I guess I should leave. Should I leave? And they're like, yeah, maybe you should. So he leaves, and he removes himself from the group. And while he is removed from the group, the other people in the group put two and two together. Somebody happens to recognize him from, What Is a Woman? And they said, that guy's not Steven. Did you hear how he said his name? That guy's Matt Walsh. He's that a-hole Matt Walsh from that What Is a Woman movie. And they gather together, and they basically figure out that they have been duped into appearing in a Daily Wire movie. They've already, if they have been paid, I hope they got paid. I hope they got paid well, frankly. Because now these people's faces are all over this thing. Their voices are in this thing, and they are being made fun of. It's clear, so clear, from the way that Matt Walsh talks to them and treats them, that he is making fun of them. And they are actually talking about some really good things for people to talk about when it comes to race. And so he comes he comes back into the room. And they have basically at that point decided to confront him. Now, at this point, they could walk out. Frankly, if you are ever in this situation, you should know you have the right, even if you have signed away the use of your image and likeness, even if you have been paid, frankly, you have the right to walk out. The worst they can do is to sue you and say, give us back the money that we paid you. But it's so not worth it for the expense that they would have to go to take you to court, that you could just walk out. And if they sent you a summons to court, get an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I can't give you legal advice. This is just how I know I've seen this happen before. And generally what would happen is you respond and you say, look, I signed an agreement in bad faith. I was informed that I was going to show up for one thing, and turns out it was another thing. I didn't agree to that. I did take the check. I did take the money for my time, but I was told that I was being paid for my time. I did sign my release, so I guess you can use my image and likeness how you like. But for what it's worth, I was told I was going to be involved in one thing, and it turns out I was actually involved in another thing. So I left. Chances are, if you do that, I'm just going to say this. I'm not going to. I can't predict anything. I don't have a crystal ball, but I have done this. I haven't done it. I haven't done anything quite like this, but I've done video production for 30 years, and I've been the guy who stops somebody and pulls them aside and says, "Listen, okay, obviously we miscommunicated. Blah 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 blah. If we threw you a little extra money, would it make it worth your time?" And sometimes somebody will say, "Yeah," and sometimes they wouldn't. I can't say for a production like this. I've never been involved in a racist documentary, so I don't know about that. So probably, maybe they would just threaten you, but chances are good they'd probably try to persuade you to come back into the room and make more of a fuss. But face him. Try to persuade you. Look, go in there. It's good for us. It's good for the documentary if you make a fool of Matt Walsh. So go in there and make a fool out of him, or something like that, right? In any event, they wind up confronting Matt Walsh, and he uses it as kind of like this martyrdom moment where, wow, all these, woke DEI supporting anti-racist people, they want me to look stupid. They want me to feel stupid, and they want you to feel stupid. And there's the little hat trick, right? Now it's about, oh, they're not making fun of me. They're making fun of you. And if you're one of these people who happens to think, differently from them, and so these people have basically, in this group meeting, they have basically walked into a trap. They sprung the trap and behaved exactly the way that Matt Walsh and his producers wanted them to. They got away with it. It's fair or unfair. They got exactly what they wanted out of it. I mentioned this before, so I'm going to show you the documentary that we really want to talk about today. I wanted just to give you a little segue, a little story. Some of you have been here long enough. You've heard me say this before. I'd ask you to forgive me, or at least just consider this a refresher. This is an amusing story anyway. So I've been working in video production since 1995. And in, I want to say 2007, I was newly married. It was after my daughter had been born. So it was like 2007. A conservative woman did contact me. This woman is deeply conservative in Arizona's film community, and happened to mention to me that she had gotten some funding for a television show that they wanted to produce. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And she had asked me what I thought about the content and what I thought about the possibility of coming on. She said, I've seen some of your work, some of your corporate work. I never worked really in television. I did infomercials and commercials for TV. But mainly my bread and butter was what we often will call industrial or corporate. Mainly I make marketing videos and training videos for companies. And that was my steady income. It's the reason why I dropped out of film school, because I got a job, and then shortly and thought, well, I'll come back to film school, then go out to Hollywood, start making, movies and getting Oscars by the age of 30. Never happened, because then I got settled down. Very glad that I did. Convinced a girl to marry me and started having babies. But in 2007, somebody came to me with an opportunity and said, we want you to come on board as a part of the production team. And it just so happens that this person I happen to know personally through friends of mine who were conservative. You're going to have friends who are conservative when you live in Arizona. I happen to know this person was deeply Republican, deeply right-winger personally. But that didn't mean I wouldn't work for them. I'm like, sure, Republicans have money. I'll make. I've worked for Republicans most of my life. Well, at that point I had. These days I do a lot more work for a broad diversity of people. But they wanted to make a paranormal activity style show. And I said, oh, cool. And she was really excited that I was excited about that. She's like, really? I didn't think you'd be into it. I'm like, oh, I don't believe in ghosts. That's bullshit. But it'd be fun to make a show. Yeah, no, I think that'd be a blast. I don't know if you know, in Arizona, there are ghost towns everywhere, like Jerome, Chandler, Arizona is said to be haunted. There's an old hotel there that has a floor in there that has a speakeasy in it that was said to be one of Al Capone's speakeasies. I actually did filming in that building, where while we were filming in this hotel for a company video, we actually heard like weird spooky things actually happening in this hotel being picked up on our microphones. Like, did you hear that? It's like, and it's like this old, because it was supposedly one of Al Capone's speakeasies where Hollywood stars would go to. Like, all the conference rooms are named after like Bing Crosby and John Wayne and stuff like that, right? So it's like all Hollywood themed, and we're in there doing Hollywood like stuff. And they're in these rooms that are all named for Hollywood stars. And then all of a sudden we start hearing spooky, weird things that were being picked up on our microphones. And I was telling her about this, it's like, oh yeah, when we were at that hotel, we would pick up weird, spooky sounding things. And she's like, are you serious? So you know about this? And I'm like, oh no, let me clarify. I'm an atheist. I don't buy any of that. No. I'm like, but the point is, you can be in a place that's not haunted, because no places are, and have ordinary production equipment, not even specialized production equipment, like not like full spectrum cameras and shit like that, and see and hear weird shit. I'm like, so if you have somebody financing this, which she claims she did, I said, you can assure them, if I come on board with your team, I know exactly how we would do it. And she's like, well, tell me, give me a piece of it. And I'm like, okay, so you know that a lot of these like radios, these like shortwave radios that they use, they can hear the messages, the squawk boxes, the wow, 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 right? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, a lot of those just have really broad, receivers on them that will receive a broad range of spectrum of frequency and scan through it. She's like, okay. I said, and while we were there at the hotel, we discovered that the maintenance guys using their regular walkie-talkies, commercial walkie-talkies, like, the ones you've seen, the Motorola, the boop, those little things, that we were picking it up all the time. We had to ask them, can you please make sure your maintenance guys aren't going out in front of the side of the hotel here, because we're picking up things that they're saying over our wireless lavaliers. I said, I guarantee you that's how they do that on those shows, is that they get an old-fashioned walkie-talkie and they just have a production guy go out into the production van, and sit there and say, what did we do? Oh, did you hear that? What did he say? Spirit, what do you say? Speak to a spirit, right? And I'm like, you just fake it. And she's like, why would we do that? And I laughed at her. I've had my turn at being a toxic atheist, friends. Why would you do that? Your producer, your backers are paying for ghosts. What happens if you show up and there are no ghosts? And she says, there are ghosts. I'm like, yeah, granted. But what happens if you happen to be there and you don't find ghosts? How many of these paranormal activity shows do you think they showed up to and there were no ghosts? It just happened to be a bad ghost day. Ghosts were on vacation. The ghosts weren't talking. Ghosts are sick of being made fun of, maybe. And she's like, she's like, the departed spirits, they always want to communicate with the living. I'm like, then why aren't they doing it more? I'm like, look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I think you're wrong. I'm not trying to convince you that you're wrong. I'm just telling you this. If you and I are talking turkey, businessman to business person, we're talking turkey. If you have a show that captures ghosts, by God, there better be fucking ghosts. That's what your money people are going to say. And I'm on their side, because I'm not showing up there especially on some kind of promise that I'm going to get paid on points on the back end. Waste a whole day, a weekend, a week out in Jerome, sweating my balls off, making an episode of your TV show, and there are no ghosts. If there, I want there to be one guy on that production crew who knows with a wink and a smile that if there are no ghosts, that granted there are ghosts, but if there are no ghosts, there are going to be ghosts, and you know how you're going to do it exactly, and that's already planned. And she's like, but that's dishonest and deceptive. I'm like, yeah, that's the business you're in. You're in reality TV. I'm like, you think that they don't know who's going to win The Bachelor when they start filming it? You think that they don't know who gets voted off the island in Survivor? This is there's nothing more fake than reality TV. And I didn't get hired for that job. So that little story was for this purpose, okay? So now Matt Walsh, the new business model for the Daily Wire, they had their turn making these provocative films. They still do them a little bit, but it's very obvious that some of them are not doing as well. You remember they did a Snow White movie, kind of flopped. They did this Am I Racist documentary follow up to What Is a Woman, obviously flopped. And now they're making a whole King Arthur show, like an answer that's supposed to be like an answer to Game of Thrones, but they're doing it behind a paywall, and you have to join Daily Wire and subscribe to Daily Wire so that you can get their content. They're trying to encroach on like the Netflix business model, because theatrical release, it's not, I mean, their day, they know their day is over when it comes to theatrical release. Their bread and butter are racist a-holes who sit at home with nobody to talk to and no dates. And, and so they just sit there and look at Matt Walsh and try and look at probably hentai memes on their, phones or something, and then cry themselves to sleep. So anyway, here is a screen for a documentary that's produced more or less in the same style. Documentary, I say with very loose terms, very loosely defined here with scare quotes. So what you are looking at here, again, I would play for you at least parts of it. We've already gotten into enough trouble this week with Google, even under fair use. If you don't know, the fair use doctrine is not really so much a formal law as it is a series of effects from laws and or court cases wherein has been decided that if you don't show more than a few seconds at a time of any kind of video content, and you are clearly showing it just for commentary purposes, then you can just use it, you can show it, you can even monetize it. And YouTube generally has honored that. It's only been this last week that myself and several other YouTube creators found that we were getting our live streams and or videos taken down or hit with copyright strikes if we showed anything, including even content produced by other YouTube creators. So I'm a little finicky about it. Until I know that that's been resolved, I'm just going to have to resort to showing you that the thing exists and then telling you about it. This documentary that you're looking at here, let me just rewind back to the opening screen here. This documentary is called The Real History of Slavery. And it's part of a series that he does called Real History. And as you can imagine, it's not. It's not real history. It's Matt Walsh spewing racist garbage for an hour and a half, and then showing you quotes from various books that you can buy if you wanted to read, actual history. Sort of. A lot of the quotes that he mines, they are selectively cherry picked to try and tell this narrative. And again, just like with What Is a Racist or What Is a Woman and Am I Racist, they write the narrative of the story that they want to tell first. And then just like they would do with interviews in documentaries like What Am I Racist? Instead of taking clips from an interview, they take clips and snippets from books about slavery. And they take the parts that favor the narrative that they're telling as if the person writing that book is reinforcing what they have to say and their perspective, and the slant that they're going after. And a lot of the facts that they report in here are factual. They are actual little known facts about history. But a lot of them, the way that Matt Walsh tells the story, adds the voiceover in his narrative, taking the clip, they show the quote from the book, and then his description of it is so distorted that that's actually telling something that the book isn't saying. Now, you could get away with that a little bit, and chances are good somebody who is quoted, whose book was quoted, is probably going to wind up reaching out to you through their publicist or their attorney, or their publishing house is going to reach out with a cease and desist order. Maybe I'm not an attorney, but I know this business. Everybody in this business, they tell you train each other from the time you're new in the business for this is what's going to happen. You're going to get a cease and desist letter. Cease and desist letters are supposed to scare you until there is a letter of intent to sue. There's really not much reason to be scared unless it's a big corporation. If it's a big corporation, chances are they're going to say either you have to pay us or you have to attribute us differently for the thing. They're only after the money. So as long as you can figure out a way to help them monetize, they don't care. And I have seen done and been in the middle of. There was I'll tell you this. Okay, so I worked for a company. Some of you have heard me mention this. I'm not going to mention them by name. I worked for a big MLM company based out of Arizona at one point for 7 years. And this company would show clips, whole segments from a local news story here in Utah about a woman who had lost weight using our products. And that woman had lost over 100 pounds. And we had that video in DVDs that weren't produced by me. They were produced by the guys before me, working for this company when the company was very small. And because they were on DVD and not on our website, not on YouTube, not on anywhere else, we're just on our DVD. Well, the news stations, the Sinclair's Broadcasting or whatever it was, I'm pretty sure it was Sinclair Broadcasting actually, they had no idea that we were showing this clip from their newscast. And because the production company that the company had hired paid something like $250,000 for this video, because nobody had thought to ask them, did you get proper release and permission to use that news clip? Nobody bothered to ask, and nobody was any the wiser when I came on board. And suddenly, I was one of the top marketing people at the company, and I got a notification. I got an email saying, "Hey, can you come into this meeting?" I go into the meeting and I say, "Yeah, sure. What's up?" And they're like, "So we just got this," and it was a letter of intent to sue. And I was like, "Oh my, who's this from?" And it was from this local news network that we had been sending out their story, this news story about this woman who lost over 100 pounds on our products. They had threatened to sue us for $4 million. And I went, "Oh shit." I'm like, well, luckily we have that kind of money now. If they'd have gotten after us when we started using this, they would have broke the company. And I was the only one laughing. Nobody else thought that was funny. They're like, "Why do we have, they're like, so we published that video from the DVD onto YouTube." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, of course we did." And they're like, "Why did we not have the releases for it?" And I said, "We don't have releases for that?" And they're like, "Didn't you make this video?" I said, "No, it was made like 5 years ago by this company that the owners of the company had hired. I know the guys over there. I can contact them." They're like, "Yeah, do that because we want to know how this happened." I'm like, "Well, I'm sure they figured that nobody would find out. And they just figured we'd guess." All right. So I contacted them. And I'm like, "Hey, dude, how's it going?" And the guy's name was Yoshi. Is his real name, Yoshi. I said, "Yoshi, what's up? It's Joe Rons over at Vroom Vroom." And he said, "Yeah, what's up?" He's like, "Do you guys need some work done?" I'm like, "No, no, thank you." Um, did you guys ever get a release on that video from the news story? And he laughed. He's like, "No." I'm like, "Oh shit, man." And he's like, "Why?" I said, "It's they're suing us over it." And he's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "It's just good advertising for their network." I'm like, "I don't know what their angle is. I'm guessing they probably just want us to settle. They're just looking for money." And he's like, "A news network looking for that kind of money?" I'm like, "They want like $4 million for it." And he's like, "Ah, fine." He's like, they're joshing you." Long story short, we wound up having our general counsel reach back to them and say, "Come on, guys, nobody needs to sue anybody. What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, thanks for getting back to us. Listen, we'll waive the whole thing and make the whole thing go away, but if you're going to show our news footage on your website, or you have to embed the video from our network." It was just about getting more traffic to them. They threatened to sue us for millions of dollars. All they wanted was for us to embed their video on our website so that would drive traffic to their advertising so they'd make more money. Anyways, I'll tell you that story to tell you this story. There's a lot of the background legal side of video production that is done on the basis of, "Nah, I bet you they don't." And it's like they have every legal right to come out and say, these authors, "You misrepresented my book as saying something fantastically racist that it doesn't actually say. You pull that shit down." But they know that by the time the producers know that doing it this way, just like with the documentaries where they have these people who got tricked into sitting in a room, but they've already signed the releases. So they get to use their image and likeness. And if they get pissed off and angry and saying, "This isn't what we were told," if they get upset and get in people's faces and start saying, "You lied to us. You told us this isn't what we thought we were going to get to," they just look like more Karens. And then all of a sudden they have more footage. And as long as the cameras are running, they're getting footage. So you've stepped into it. You sprung their trap. In this case, they don't even have to do that much or spend the money. They can just use snippets from people's books and say, "Oh, here you go. This is what's actually saying is that white people aren't responsible for slavery." And and so they know that these authors aren't going to sue them, and or that their publishing companies aren't going to sue them, or that if they do, they can just pull them aside and say, "Look, how much money is it going to take to make this go away?" Or some kind of deal gets made on the back end. They know this is never going to see a courtroom. And and so it makes sense that now they're making content like this where they're abusing authors and using historians, actual established historians, to validate claims that don't actually get made, with one exception. And I said, I'm going to look through this thing and I'm going to find one exception that they rely on for most of the narrative. That person is going to be the person, at least one person, who is going to be the person that they can lean on and say, "This historian says this here, this here, this here." All of Matt's claims that he says in between these other quotes are all supported by the work of this historian. And I knew it. If I went looking for it, I would find it. I've done enough of this to be able to see how a narrative is being built here. And lo and behold, I found it. It doesn't take long to see that there are multiple quotes in the story from an author by the name, a historian named Simon Webb. Now, here, let me go ahead and remove this. I'm going to show you Simon Webb. Like, I'm actually going to show you the man himself, and I'm going to show you some of his content. Simon Webb, Simon Webb was known for a while as on YouTube and I think Twitter or X and some other content platforms as History Debunked. And if you know anything about History Debunked, you know that he was pulled from several platforms, the so-called woke platforms, because he was pushing narratives that were frankly dangerous. And this man that you're about to look at, this is an article in the European Conservative, and this is the man himself, Simon Webb. The first thing you need to understand about Simon Webb is that he is not a professor anywhere of history or anything else. He is a digital content creator, and he is a guy who writes content for a newsletter, for a magazine. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Guys, I've been divorced. The ink on my divorce decree is not even dry, and I am swimming in women. I'm not going to complain. All right. So, if I look at my phone, I have now surpassed the. I promised the X that I would check to make sure it wasn't an emergency. Now it's checking for other reasons. Anyway, look, Daddy's got to eat. All right, here we go. So here's an example. This is an actual publication live in the world. This is from a newsletter called the European Conservative, or a website called European Conservative, and it's about as juicy as you might think. The title right across the top says, interview. The subject of slavery has become a question of black and white, says author and historian Simon Webb. To call this man a historian is to be very liberal with the application of the word historian. It does say Simon Webb is the author of several nonfiction books. Debatable. Simon Webb is the author of several books, made to appear as if they are nonfiction, on subjects that are supposed to be nonfiction, ranging from academic works on education to popular history. He mainly writes about culture and history. He works as a history consultant to television companies and filmmakers, and also writes for various magazines and newspapers. I think that probably is true. He probably does work as a consultant to the Daily Wire, or at least it does appear to be, because again, his narrative from his books are what primarily are driving the narrative of this episode of Real History. He spoke with EuropeanConservative.com about his book, The Forgotten Slave Trade, The White European Slaves of Islam. This is what you need to understand here. This book right here is widely scanned by the historian world as being complete bullshit. He may get names and dates correct, but the wording he uses to describe events is almost universally panned as being just completely fabricated, ranging from exaggerated to completely fabricated nonsense. So you can believe or disbelieve whatever you want. You can do as much research into Simon Webb as you want. I will say this much is consistently true. He is the author of some 20 books that you can find on Amazon. They get 4.5 5-star reviews, and a lot of them, he appears to make very good money selling books. He also writes articles, and the place where he writes articles is where we want to talk right now, because this is what I'll say. You're welcome to read this man's books. I don't recommend it. It can't poison your brain other than with racism. And I'm going to show you why. Okay. I'm going to share screen again. This is a website I'm going to recommend you don't go to if you don't have to. But if you want to, you're welcome to. Look, it's not going to, I don't know if it gets you on some kind of list if you go to this website. If there is a list for people who go to this website, then I'm now on it, because I've gone through all throughout this thing. So this is a magazine called Aporia. You can subscribe and consume their content. I believe they have printed versions of their magazine. I'm not entirely sure. What you need to know is that this website and magazine that Simon Webb has frequently written for is an asset, basically it is a distribution channel of an organization called, let me make sure I get this exactly right because I've been saying it right and wrong. Here we go. It's a company that is based out of Wyoming. Already, you should be suspicious if you know anything about LLCs or foundations based out of Wyoming. And I want to make sure I get it right. Hold on. Stop it. Okay, yeah, that's right. An organization called HDF, or Human Diversity Foundation. That's very important to know. So I'm going to switch this over and show you a different website. I know I'm taking you from website to website. What you need to know is that this content that they are driving on this Matt Walsh show is from HDF. At the end of the day, it's this guy who works with the HDF spreading their narrative about slavery, and it is important to know that this is how this guy makes money. This is how he makes his career, at least as it appears to me. Simon Webb, if that's your real name, you're welcome to come on my show anytime. Contact me anytime. Tell me that I got it wrong. I'll be happy to admit that I am wrong. Hey, here at Hellfire Agency, we get things wrong sometimes. Yeah, there you go. Da-da-da. We get things wrong sometimes, but I'm pretty sure I'm not wrong about this. I'd be happy to have somebody correct me. Let me show you this website. There is an organization based out of the United Kingdom, which Simon Webb is also based out of the United Kingdom, called Hope Not Hate. Pretty good organization, if you ask me. This is their website that talks specifically about this organization. I just want you to see some of the things. I just want to give you a quick preview of this, okay? You see this young man over here looks like Kyle Rittenhouse, times double. It's like if you cloned Kyle Rittenhouse with Kyle Rittenhouse. Rittenhouse? I might be wrong. What's that? What's the kid's name? Yeah, anyways. He looks like that one kid. He looks like every white man. I'm not gonna say y'all look alike, but there's an age where we all look alike. Anyway, this young man, his name is Matthew Frost. Okay. This story is written by a journalist who infiltrated this organization called HBD or HBF. At the conference, it says in this article, at the conference, our infiltrator met a man who introduced himself as Matthew Archer, although we know his real name is Matthew Frost. So already you're getting an idea of how the trade that they're engaged in here is going. Frost said he was the founder of Aporia. That's the newsletter we were just looking at that Simon Webb writes for. A website running stories on HBD, or human biodiversity. Important. This is the belief that there are meaningful and measurable differences between different races, especially in terms of intelligence. It is, in essence, the misuse of science to promote racist ideology. But doesn't end there. Frost claims Aporia was being read by important people in Westminster, Washington, D.C., and Silicon Valley. I actually don't doubt that that's true. An anonymous American tech tycoon, our undercover reporter was told, had even invested a large chunk of money in the project. Okay, so the insinuation there, I'm just using my gut feel here, and my gut feel is only my gut feel, but I'm pretty sure what they're saying there is that they got some kind of infusion of cash, either from Elon Musk or from Peter Thiel. And frankly, either one of those I would readily believe. Advocates of eugenics are often stereotyped as old, conspiratorial cranks whose papers are confined to obscure publications with dwindling audiences. Hello, Simon Webb. Aporia, however, is younger, slicker, and much more popular, boasting 14,000 subscribers on Substack and almost 10,000 followers on X Twitter. By the way, you can also find Simon Webb on Substack and pay him to go and read his articles. I've only seen snippets of them. Basically, if you pay Simon Webb on Substack, you can read about how Black people are dumber than everybody else. And that's basically all the guy. That's basically, from what I can tell, everything that he writes. After the Tallinn conference, Hope Not Hate set out to understand the wider ecosystem in which Aporia operates. Over 6 months, our reporter posed as a wealthy investor looking to give Aporia a six-figure cash injection. Excited by the prospect, Matthew Frost and his colleagues revealed their inner secrets in business meetings, dinners, video calls, WhatsApp conversations, voice notes, and internal company documents. We discovered. So I love the way this is laid out. They really put all of their information in. So we're going to say some buzzwords here. Hopefully we don't get pulled down for this. I think it's important to say exactly what is contained here in this article for YouTube and or Twitch and or any other sundry organizations out there who are curious. This is in this reporting by this organization. This is not reporting by the Church of Korihor or Hellfire Agency. What they discovered. We discovered the Pioneer Fund, a Nazi-affiliated eugenics organization thought to be essentially defunct, has rebranded as Human Diversity Foundation. Aporia is part of the HDF's organization and is a scientific racism research team. Andrew Conru, the multimillionaire entrepreneur who created Adult Friend Finder, has given $1.3 million to HDF. After being contacted prior to this report's publication, he said he would cut ties with the company. HDF has connections to Alternative für Deutschland, the far-right German party, and hopes to create a white-only ethno-state. If you don't know, Alternative für Deutschland was the conservative alternative, conservative alternative party that was once feared to be the party that was going to take over Germany and basically bring back Nazism in Germany. And now they have another party that's apparently going to do the same thing because Alternative für Deutschland got such bad press over that. At least that's my understanding of it. I'm not German, and I only have, and I haven't even read anything about either of those parties, frankly, in a couple of years. HDF is working to create a cult of weapons-trained activists inspired by Scientology and the Nazi SS. Okay, I'm just going to keep running here. I just want to give you, because I thought this was fascinating. Now, the Pioneer Fund I had heard about before, but I had always figured, okay, well, there are organizations said to be like the Pioneer Fund. But once people find out about the origins of the Pioneer Fund, it just kind of went away. As you read in the article up above, it was just assumed by everybody that, it was, once it became shameful to be in any way associated with the German party from olden times, this fund just like collapsed, right? It turns out maybe not so much. So let me keep reading to you here. So the Pioneer Fund was founded in the U.S. in 1937. Its board members distributed Nazi propaganda and developed close ties to the Third Reich. Its first act was to screen Krank. I don't speak German, so maybe I don't remember that. Maybe I'm not saying that right. I'm saying The Hereditary Defective, a Nazi movie that paved the way for its euthanasia program. In the post-war years, Pioneer paid for researchers to publish papers seeking proof that Black people were less intelligent than white people. Some of them were academics, such as Richard Lynn, a psychology professor at the University of Ulster, who aspired to, quote, have a go at the rehabilitation of eugenics. Others were far-right activists like Jared Taylor, a white nationalist who has said, when Blacks are left entirely to their own devices, Western civilization, any kind of civilization disappears. These are the people who started the organization that rebranded effectively as Aporia. That among its projects is this magazine Aporia that Simon Webb writes for. Pioneer boasted assets of around $2.5 million in the early 2000s, but its activities and endowment have since declined. In the last decade, the fund awarded smaller sums to fewer people and in some years failed to grant anything. The drop in activity has prompted speculation that Pioneer was inexorably sliding into irrelevance. Our undercover investigation reveals that Pioneer has instead relaunched itself as Human Diversity Foundation. As a charity, Pioneer had to disclose the sources of its funding. HDF, as a private company, has no such obligation. However, we can disclose that Andrew Conroe, an American tech entrepreneur, gave $1.3 million to HDF. And it goes on. So basically, it goes on into the history. So basically, that guy, Richard Lynn, that they were talking about here, this historian who wanted to restore eugenics to its, intended glory under the Reich, he died in 2023. Around and about that same time, this young man that we were just talking about, Matthew Frost, appears to have distanced himself from the organization, left the organization, and it became one of the assets. It became one of the primary distribution arms for information on race science for this organization, HDF. And so basically, this is how, and it just keeps going on. It has connections to a far right group led by the Danish group, led by this man, Emil Kierkegaard. You can look him up. It's dirty. Basically, the longer you look into the history of this organization, the dirtier and dirtier and dirtier it gets. This is who you're dealing with when you're dealing with this Simon Webb, who's being quoted all throughout that episode of Real History. And there it is. I could show you more. In fact, maybe I should show you more. Maybe we should run the risk of running amok from the censors. I'm definitely not going to show you more Daily Wire because I'll definitely get a copyright strike for that. But my understanding is that History Debunked, this guy Simon Webb's show, or his channel on YouTube, etc., was pulled from pretty much everywhere because of, if my memory serves correctly, from like some kind of dangerous claims. I believe it was medical claims or something like that, not surprisingly. But he recently has relaunched with a new channel. And this new channel says History Debunked Simon Webb. Is that right? Yeah. But this man gets interviewed in conservative circles, these conservative podcasts all the time now. He just gets dropped in. He has an English accent, so people think he's, fancy or what have you. But he has his own channel. And when I went to look, if this is the channel. Yep. Oh, this is from today. I'm like, why is this a different video? Okay, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you the screen. We're just going to do it. We're just going to do it. You guys want to see? You don't believe me? Well, you're going to believe me. Here we go. YouTube, look, I'm just trying to promote your platform. This is all for, hey, let me put this back up. Clips are used for commentary only. Okay? Used for commentary purposes only. This is the guy's channel, History Debunked. And basically, if you look at, okay, so let's just look, for example, at the titles. These are his videos. This is one just published today. I haven't watched this yet. It says, when a single white Christian woman prays silently on the streets of England, she is arrested. Okay, fine. That definitely sounds like a story that would draw his attention. An independent review finds that the BBC shoehorns black people into television drama. It's not that the things he's saying are factually incorrect. Often the things that he says are factually incorrect. it's the perspective that he comes at the same information that's available to anybody else. He just comes at it from a different angle and calls it news. And comes at it, frankly, from a racist angle and calls it news. In modern Britain, as in other countries, political power grows from the barrel of a gun. That seems, frankly, that seems wrong. Okay, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong on that. Britain has put a foreigner in charge of restricting how many other foreigners enter our country. So you got your standard anti-immigrant rant. This definitely sounds like the guy who claims he has a career consulting with filmmakers on history or culture, and really what it is apparently I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have more proof than what I have shown you so far, and it's not definitive proof, that he probably is on the payroll of Daily Wire, or at least has some kind of arrangement with Daily Wire, saying, if you'll platform my books alongside those of real historians, you can say that you got all this from my books. And because he knows that their audience is going to love that, their audience and his audience are the same audience. Why is there a move to screen black men for cancer of the prostate, and what is that? And what is the significance? Is another one of his videos. The multi-faith prayer room, a visible sign of the creeping Islamification of Britain. How Keir Starmer's scheme to reduce immigration from France actually increased it. More anti. The guy doesn't make. Where are this guy's documentaries about, the history of the Roman Empire? Where are his documentaries even about the history of shipping in, the Netherlands? Where is any interesting content about history? Which you have here is this guy ranting about race all the time. He's ranting about race, and he's ranting about immigration pretty much nonstop. I'm going to show you a little bit of a video that I had begun watching. I think that this is the video I've been watching just a day ago. Is this it? I'm sure it won't matter. Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, this is the video. When I started researching this is the video I had watched of his. I'm not going to play a lot of it, not just because I'm worried about getting the live taken down. Anybody still with me here? You guys are still with me? Not just because I'm worried about the live taken down, but frankly, I just don't want to platform much of what this guy is saying. This is just a sample, okay? Right from the get-go off the top of this guy's video.
Switch to TurboTax.
Shut up, TurboTax.
Hello again. One of the things which I find fascinating is irrational beliefs. I don't mean beliefs which are false, but rather those which are held on grounds other than the strictly logical and rational. And some religious beliefs are like that, of course. I'm not thinking here so much as faith in the existence of God in itself, for that can be held on purely rational grounds, but rather the details of individual religions.
Okay. Do I need to explain much about how it is this guy is already pissing me off? All right. Fair enough to say, the arguments for the existence of God are generally mathematical arguments. Generally. There are a few of them that are better than others, but generally speaking, they're all pretty bad. But at least when you're having a rational conversation about the rational arguments for God, you're at least having a rational argument. In other words, you're having arguments where you're using terms related to rationalism, just to say it's not so much a question of what is empirically evident as a question of asking questions about what would be true regardless of whether or not it was evident, and then asking hypothetical questions about what would you expect to exist in the world, even if you didn't see it directly or couldn't observe it directly through science. And so you can have rational conversations about things like what would happen if if the universe had one shape of gravity versus a different shape of gravity, or what would happen if you consider what if children were born having inherited information from their parents or inherited some kind of behavioral traits from their parents, um, without those necessarily being genetic, but being inherited through some other means. What would then you can ask questions like, well, then we wouldn't observe it directly through science, but what would be the effect and what could we expect? How could we validate? How could we verify? Those are those are logical experiments, thought experiments, rational arguments that could be made. Tabula rasa is a good example. John Locke's tabula rasa from his right essays on human understanding, which he posits, look, even if it isn't true, we probably ought to treat it as true that every child is born without any accountability for their parents' actions and without any knowledge of their the motives for their parents' actions, and certainly cannot be held guilty for their parents' actions. So a child is born innocent. And we see that even in things like the Book of Mormon, for example, in the teachings of Korihor. Korihor, we even have a song in the Church of Korihor called "A Child Is Not Guilty." It's based on this idea of Lockean tabula rasa that found its way into the Book of Mormon, which is a purely rational idea. So he's getting into this idea that God can be held on rational grounds. Of course, he doesn't mention how irrational it is to say that you believe in God purely for rational reasons when the majority of people who do believe in God believe in a God that can't be proven rationally, a God who forgives sins, a God who hears prayers, a God who produces miracles, a God who heals people. And so that is the God that people have faith in, and that faith is necessarily irrational. Otherwise, it would not be. Otherwise, it wouldn't be faith. And we are frequently being sold, at least in the Christian world, and to some extent, I would say even in the Islamic world and other and the Abrahamic faith in general, to say that that faith is stronger and better and more valid and more sanctifying if it is not rational, if it is irrational. That shows a layer of what you would call the term that psychologists use is absorption, a level of absorption, a willingness to believe a thing without evidence or proof of it, but instead just to be caught up into the spirit of the movement, get caught up in the spirit of the moment, and experience it without needing any other proof than your individual confirmation bias.
For instance, the idea that Muhammad rode to heaven from Jerusalem on his magic horse Al-Buraq, or that Our Lady did not die but was transported bodily to heaven. Both these things might be true, of course, but there is no evidence for them. Holding them to be true is therefore not a matter of reason. We find the same thing when considering matters such as ethnicity and race.
Okay, so now we're going to get into this. Now, remember, I said, do you remember that I was talking about the Mormon apologists, like the guys over at Latter Day Saints, these people over at, even Jacob Hansen at Rational Faith? I always get it wrong. Yeah, I think it is Rational Faith. I always mix it up with the way that William Lane Craig calls his channel. Anyways, Jacob Hansen's people. You get these apologists, even the professional apologists, the ones who aren't just YouTube creators, but who are, full-time Mormon apologists, will often use this same rhetoric in which it's not so much the facts that they say that are incorrect, though they often get their facts wrong, or they say it in a way that is not sustainable by the evidence. Instead, it's what they choose to focus on and choose to ignore. So, for example, this guy, Simon Webb, one of the common criticisms, I'll just tell you, having read quite a bit of criticism of him, and that I was just looking at things that would verify the criticisms that I had about, because this is my bias, right? About Matt Walsh, because at the end of the day, we're talking about why it is that Matt Walsh and his crew decided to focus on using this guy's content, this guy's books, to weave this narrative about the slave trade. Um, the narrative that they are trying to weave is that, one, white people shouldn't be ashamed of slavery. To some extent, that's a straw man argument. I don't know of anybody who argues that all white people, thoughtful faith, thank you, Hyde, is Jacob Hansen's channel. Thank you. I always get it wrong. Rational faith is William Lane Craig. Both are bad. I'm just kidding. Watch Jacob Hansen. Don't watch William Lane Craig. At least you get interesting things to scream at your computer about when you're watching Jacob Hansen. You're welcome, Jacob. Somebody clip that. And yeah, Jacob, you can, there you go. That's my return for your having said I was your favorite atheist. But but one of the criticisms that this man's work is that he equates, this is an old trope that's been pushed by race, so-called people who are passionate about race science for a while. He equates indentured servitude with slavery. And you've heard this. You'll hear this narrative repeated on Fox News. You'll hear it repeated on conservative bloggers, and so forth, is they'll say, look, many people don't know that among the people who owned slaves were Black people. And they'll say, many people don't know that among the slaves that existed that were owned were white people. Okay? It's not so much that the facts are wrong. It's that the statement is wrong. Indentured servitude was a form of slavery, completely. It was a way of forcing somebody on a kind of debt system to use physical labor after they emigrated to pay off their immigration. And it's fair to say that that is slavery. If certainly, and I think that it is certainly fair to say that wage slavery is slavery. But you'd be very hard pressed to find somebody who believes that indentured servitude is slavery and doesn't to agree also that wage slavery is slavery, which is to say that when somebody is forced to work for wages lower than the cost of living in the area where they live, it is a system in which they are effectively being paid only enough to make sure that they continue in debt and are never able to actually invest in themselves and invest in their future and create generational wealth, etc., because the system intentionally is systemically trying to keep them from being able to garner that generational wealth. And so that's your system of wage slavery. Another form of slavery that you can mention that is slavery would be sharecropping. It's basically a similar concept. That when, for example, after the 13th Amendment was passed, you had a lot of people who were slaves, and even before, people who were freed slaves and freemen would rent from their former masters or from at least other plantation owners who were of the same class. They would rent small farms, work those small farms, and all of the revenue and or product of that farm went to the plantation owners that they were renting from, and any money that they happened to get to provide for themselves would end up being spent at retail outlets or wholesale outlets or company stores. They're also owned by the same class, owned by the same group of people. So even the money that they spend, that they earn, winds up going back into the hands of the people who used to be slave owners, or whether theirs or at least were slave owners in the same region. And so you have this system of sharecropping that is, frankly, at a glance, very, very obviously another form of slavery. Well, to say that indentured servitude is another form of slavery is surely true. To equate it with the same as chattel slavery is just not right. What makes American slavery And again, the straw man argument that Matt Walsh makes in the documentary is that most people will say, with no evidence, by the way, that I saw, no studies to support this, but okay, never mind, that America invented slavery and that the transatlantic slave trade was invented for America. I don't know anybody who thinks that. Now, maybe some dotards out there do think that that's true. Well, certainly that's not true. Slavery was happening, but long before America existed. You remember that there were slaves already in America when the Revolution happened. There had been slaves here for hundreds of years, even before the British landed and founded colonies in America. There were slaves all throughout what we call Latin America now. We call it Latin America because it was settled or conquered by the Spanish conquistadors, who had the discovery doctrine. Talked about this many times in this series. It keeps coming up because it is continually relevant. That the doctrine of discovery, declared by the Pope, was that if any culture or any nation, any people, did not convert to Christianity, they could be exterminated, or they could be taken as slaves and all of their material wealth seized, because God had meant for the world to be Christian. And so by the time that America shows up on the scene, slavery has existed in the Americas for hundreds of years, and that didn't just happen in the Americas all of a sudden out of the doctrine of discovery either. Of course, it had existed all over the world for a while. So when people say, for example, that the word slave comes from the word Slav because Russians were among the first slaves, I've seen both ways on that. I don't think that it really matters. But the attention on that, why it would even matter what the etymology of the word slave is, to say that it was Russian, is this implication that the first slaves were white people. There's no indication, no reason to believe that any group of people were the first slaves. There are slaves talked about in the Bible and slavery talked about in the Bible. But as any person who defends the Bible will tell you, well, there were slaves, but then you had slaves and then there were slaves. And these were different kind of slaves. They were indentured servants. All of a sudden, indentured servitude isn't the same thing as a slave who was born in chattel slavery. What is particularly unique to American chattel slavery, as far as I am aware, is that this is the first nation that had a system wherein slaves were born slaves, expected to live all their life as slaves, and if they were freed, were only freed by the generosity of their masters. That's not indentured servitude. To say that, oh, well, there were Irish slaves and there were Scottish slaves and there were slaves from all over Western and Eastern Europe. Yes, there were indentured servants of those various kinds. To say that that is the same as chattel slavery is just outright lies. There were breeding plantations in America, that is to say, plantations where slaves were made forcibly. That is a very different thing than capturing or purchasing captured slaves from someplace else. Which of those is a good kind of slavery? Neither of them. They're both bad. But to say that they are both the same kind of bad is frankly terrible. Because in the case where you have slaves who are born, the children of slaves, expected to be slaves all their lives, and to, if their masters choose, be forced and compelled to make more slaves and not to have families, not to have homes, not to have the possibility of freedom, but to be just simply bred and then their children distributed and sold as slaves, is treating human beings like animals. And that is why American slavery really became so notoriously bad as a system of chattel slavery. The straw man argument that's being made throughout this series, whether it's by Simon Webb's books, his awful books that are quoted, or the narrative that is very clearly inspired by Simon Webb and his narrative is that white people suffered, and so white people don't need to feel guilty about slavery. In fact, if anybody, this is Prager University did the same thing. I don't know if do you guys remember Dennis Prager? Dennis Prager is the guy for whom Prager University is founded. It is a university in the same way that Trump University is a university, okay, or was before it was shut down. Frankly, Prager University should be shut down for the same reason. Prager University, Dennis Prager got into a lot of trouble a few years back. He used to appear on conservative shows or on a wide variety of shows. He used to be on Bill Maher's shows all the time back in the days of Politically Incorrect and stuff like this. And he was more or less a well-respected conservative pundit. You know, you could see him on the news. You could see him on culture shows and things like this. Everybody thought he was obnoxious and annoying unless they agreed with him. But, you know, he was a more or less respected person in the academic world. And he was Jewish, so nobody threw accusations of his being anti-Semitic. He is Jewish, I should say. And nobody throws accusations about his being anti-Semitic, even when he says very anti-Semitic things. It's very difficult to label the man as being racist, generally speaking. Until one day he was on his podcast ranting, more or less like how I might tend to do here, but he was ranting with, delivering some racist rants. And you can go and watch it. I'm not going to play it for you because I've already played too much content, from somebody else's videos. But in effect, if I remember the quote exactly, that got him suddenly canceled from appearances and forced him underground. He was talking about slavery, and the quote that he had made, and this is me quoting him best of my memory, was that things for slaves weren't always so bad. Slavery wasn't so bad for Black people. Again, this is his words, not mine. His feelings, Dennis Prager's feelings, not mine. This is the statement he ends up having to make apologies for. This is the statement that ended this guy. It's not me, it's him. I'm quoting him loosely. And he said, for one thing, it kept families together. That wasn't true. Any person who's a student of the history of slavery knows that families were frequently split up and sold into different owners and to different plantations, and frequently it was done so specifically so that they couldn't establish family identities. Oftentimes, and this is verified in the same facts that this same racist narrative likes to bring up again and again. They say, for example, that Black people in America, you may think that only white people own Black people, but some slave owners were Black. It's true that some slave owners were Black. It's also true that some slave owners, quote unquote, who went and bought slaves, bought their family members so that they could liberate them. It's also true that some Black slave owners, apparently, as far as I know, and I don't know, I'm not an expert in this subject. I've heard these claims made on these racist channels that some of them were particularly cruel to slaves. I don't know that to be true or not true, but it wouldn't surprise me that human beings who had been treated cruelly as slaves and then decided once they were freed that they would also become slave owners, decided to be cruel to slaves themselves. It wouldn't be beyond human beings to decide, well, yeah, I guess I'll just buy into it. If I'm going to be treated this way, rather than resisting the problem, I'll just become the problem. That doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that slavery was not bad. And it doesn't mean that anything that came out of the Reconstruction Amendments is immoral or unconstitutional because It's just meant as the narrative is being given by Matt Walsh's crew, and I'm just giving you my interpretation, having actually watched the content. The narrative that he's pushing is that effectively even the constitutional amendments that have been made, most notoriously the 14th Amendment, and this is how it all ties back to the immigration policy, the Reconstruction Amendments after the end of the Civil War, and from there all the way to the Civil Rights Act and ending Jim Crow laws, etc., were all about a racist narrative in their mind of trying to convince white people, all people who are white, that they should be ashamed for slavery. When really, any person who knows the history of the Reconstruction Amendments, and I admit I only have the government propagandized version, and it is government propagandized version, and whatever research I do over time, reading, for example, the various people's history of the United States, is that black people were not the only ones subjugated to racism or to slavery, but they were predominantly the ones who were, and that the Reconstruction Amendments, including the 14th Amendment, which assures that any person born on American soil is an American citizen, were created so that a system of racism that came out of slavery could not force those people into an apartheid condition where they were relegated to being just U.S. persons living in the United States, who didn't have the right to vote, didn't have the right to own property, didn't have the right to move freely to and from the United States or within the United States, couldn't own businesses, couldn't, receive credit or financing, couldn't get educations in the same way that quote unquote American kids did, presumably because American kids were considered by some to only be white kids. And if that wasn't going to be a problem, if nobody thought that, oh no, nobody's saying that white people are the only Americans, well, then it shouldn't be a problem to say, great, so let's ensure that everybody understands, if you're born in this continent, if you're born inside the boundaries of these United States, you are a natural born American citizen. Well, they pushed back on that. Well, no, we're not going, they didn't want to support that. And yet, that same policy, you'll hear people like just earlier this month, we were talking about Kai Schwemmer, who's this Turning Points USA style debater that the Mormons have been sending around, not the Mormon church itself, but that this Mormon subculture has been sending around doing debates and speeches. Recently gave a speech here in Utah, I believe, where he talks about we should do away with the 14th Amendment. They've been trying to get rid of it. There are people at work here who have been trying to get rid of the Reconstruction Amendments from the Civil War since they were passed. Generally speaking, those people are relegated to the ash heap of history. They are treated as outcasts and fringe, liars and, and bigots. But now we live in a culture and a system and a day and age where they instead are being platformed at the center of movements that are being financed by shadowy groups that are not one ethnic group. They're not one, organization. Of course, conspiracy theories will abound that it is said ethnic group that is doing this, or that it is the Freemasons doing this, or it is, whatever. Okay. I just showed you the reason why there is even a history, a narrative to tell in this Matt Walsh documentary is because of this guy who writes for Aporia, a news magazine that, as far as I can tell through my research so far, and I'm happy to have somebody show me where I'm wrong, is actually owned by the same people who had run the Pioneer Fund or had been inherited by the Pioneer Fund had been inherited from. Yeah, that's the way it is. You have an organization where people are collecting money, specifically large donations from big donors, to distribute eugenics materials. And where does it suss out? How it gets there is really pretty bald on the face. You can deduce it by looking at it, but only deduce it by looking at it because, of course, it doesn't take much. Once it's published in a forum like Aporia and then this guy Simon Webb's books, all you have to do is take the information, put his name on there, put the name of a book on there in one or two sections, and then you can build your whole narrative and add quotes from other historians in there. And it looks like all these historians agree that this is the case and say things that are outright lies. Some that are conjecture, some that are outright lies. And do it all to service a narrative that says people who are white are just naturally better than other people, more intelligent than other people, or what have you. Go on and fill it in with all the same dog whistles that we hear again and again. Like they will say 80% of the crimes are committed by 20% of the people. They didn't say anything racist there. Well, yeah, actually they did because everybody knows what they mean by that. This is how you perpetuate these lies and stereotypes in an age and in a day and age where by and large the institutions that we trust, whether that's journalism, education, libraries, universities, are generally dominated by intellectuals who have organized their materials to ensure that they actually apply real values. And that's where I'm going to end this here. We're going to finish up talking about this now. I want to talk about the work. It is fair when conservatives like Matt Walsh say, yeah, well, and he says this, take my word for it, in his documentaries in some sense. He says there are a lot of things, just like this guy Simon Webb is saying, there are a lot of things that the left, why this has anything to do with socialism or progressivism, I don't think can really be validated. But all right, I'm left of center, and I happen to be progressive, not only economically but also politically. So, all right, hit me with it. He says a lot of the things that people left of center, the people on the left, claim are true, are not strictly true in the empirical sense either. Okay, I'm going with it. And the exact example in which that Matt Walsh is giving is, well, let me go back to Simon Webb. Simon Webb says the one irrational belief that they have is that people on the left, quote unquote, have, or people who are pro-immigrant or people who are anti-racist have, is that all races and all ethnic groups are capable of the same intelligence, and that genetics has no factor in this intelligence. To say that we believe that, not because, and I will throw my hat in the ring to say, I do believe that ethnicity does not play into a person's ability to be intelligent or capable. I do believe that. To say that I don't believe that because of the science behind genetics and race is true. I believe it on a moral value. But that's because, number one, there's enough reason to believe that it is true. Two, anytime that, by the way, Simon Webb, when you see this, which maybe you will, two is anytime that we hear the alternative, which is this narrative that no, certain ethnic groups are more intelligent than other ethnic groups, a la Charles Murray and the bell curve. If you know, you know. And I'm sorry that you do and that I do too. Whenever we hear that, we find out that the science is either seriously flawed in its methodology, or the science is generated to confirm the bias of very racist people like Charles Murray or Simon Webb, apparently. I mean, not apparently. I mean, I've consumed enough of this guy's content just going through his videos and reading a little bit of his writing to say, wow, this is probably one of the more racist people I've probably ever heard of. And to look at it and say, look, I don't want to live in a world where there are values that value people on the basis of their ethnic group. And I remember this goes back actually to atheism and Sam Harris. About some of you who are atheists may remember, or who just like Sam Harris's content. I think Sam Harris is one of the more brilliant people, not just among atheists and among neuroscientists, but frankly, one of the most brilliant people I've ever heard of. I've read Sam Harris's books. I followed Sam Harris's content for a while. I like Sam Harris. I don't agree with Sam Harris on everything. I thought that his anti-trans rant after the 2024 election was particularly unlikable. But I remember the interview he had with Charles Murray about the bell curve. This was before he denounced Charles Murray, and if I remember correctly, he said something to the effect of, I never probably should have had that guy on my show, knowing now that he was going behind closed doors in meetings where he was basically delivering racist rants against Black people. And if you don't know, The Bell Curve is a book that Charles Murray and one of his co-authors wrote years ago that took IQ scores of people of different ethnic groups and tried to distinguish which different ethnic groups were faster and better at calculating logical processes off the top of their heads. This was given under the false assumption that IQ tests are completely, quote unquote, study agnostic, which means that it doesn't matter how much you study, how well you read, how much you practice, your IQ is your IQ, regardless of how smart you are in terms of book smarts, in terms of the amount of content and information you have or practice that you have. Well, subsequent studies have shown that that is not true, that people who score well at IQ tests, yes, may have some natural ability for taking IQ tests, but they could actually improve their scores by practicing IQ tests and by learning how IQ tests were written, more about how IQ tests were written and how to answer them, and how they were how you could generally gain the system by answering true and false questions, for example, faster, getting to questions where you have to think about the answer faster, so you make sure that you get to the other ones faster, and completing it in shorter time. You can learn how to gain the system and actually improve your test scores in IQ tests significantly. That's part of the reason why you'll notice they stopped using IQ tests to try for things like placement into work positions. It used to be at one point that everybody thought, well, eventually we'll just give everybody an IQ test and we'll be able to sort them out by what jobs you can do. If you had a low IQ, you definitely could never be a lawyer. If you had a lower IQ, you could definitely never be a computer programmer. If you had a lower IQ, you could maybe, do this job or that job, and that would be one way of sorting people by IQ, by their natural ability to process logic. Sure, most people have, generally speaking, a range of how they are going to score an IQ test, no matter how much preparation they have. But the fact that you can fundamentally change your IQ score by practicing IQ tests and learning how IQ tests are written mean that it is not study agnostic. That the truth is that if, for example, white people scored better than people of other ethnic groups, it's because they had been taught how to take IQ tests, and that was it. And Charles Murray wouldn't ever have admitted to that. He resists it every chance he gets. And when Sam Harris, but I mentioned the Sam Harris interview because Sam Harris brings up to him, and I'll never forget it because it stuck out in my mind. Sam Harris says, most of my colleagues, because remember, Sam Harris is a neuroscientist. He says he said he read the bell curve and he looked into the science, and he said it's not so much the scientific method, the methodology I want to address with you. But he said myself and most of my colleagues want to know, why would you even look at this? He says, I want, and Charles Murray challenged him. And he said, that's a very ascientific point of view, basically saying that our motive for looking at the science would change the data that came out. But it necessarily does, because the methodology that they are using is not being checked for the fact that the bias of the people conducting the test, which turns out to be a very instructive and informative thing when you consider that the way that they're judging the ability of people of different ethnic groups is based almost exclusively on IQ tests. It then becomes important to determine, are IQ tests by themselves a race prejudiced system for gauging intelligence? And when it was proven that the answer is yes, that people in different ethnic groups were, for whatever reason, exposed to tests like IQ tests at different rates and had education in how to take IQ tests in different ways, by different means, and that the same individual could be taught how to take an IQ test so that they could score better, showed that it wasn't a reliable measure for how any individual person is able to score on an IQ test, much less an entire ethnic group, much less in a question like what Charles Murray basically infers in the bell curve, which is that the brain develops differently in a person with certain genetic factors, and those genetic factors are all being inherited through race. And that, which is in the core, in the nutshell of it, at the very heart of that question is eugenics. And so it seems almost counterintuitive, but I would say the critical thinking standard here is to say, yes, absolutely, it is an ad hominem to disqualify anybody's scientific claims by saying you are a bad person, if racism were exclusively about being a bad person. But racism isn't exclusively about the quality and morality of a person. Racism is about the quality of the thinking. And the quality of the thinking that needs to be addressed in that is there really isn't race as we are taught it. And that the people who want you to believe in race as it has been taught, and that there are groups of people who exclusively descend from these various groups of people, and that their behaviors can be therefore, classified into certain traits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and validate all of these prejudices that some people have. That whole narrative is based largely on either biblical traditions or traditions that come from some other cultural groups, holy books that tell a history and the narrative of the distribution of race in this world that is based on claims that are easily debunked by looking at the history of the human family, looking at the diversity of gifts and talents and traits of people within the same ethnic group, and looking at the history, looking at haplogroups, looking at how families have married between families over the entirety of the history of the human species. And to see how frequently that changes and how many factors factor into cultural motifs, factor into natural gifts and abilities, factor into even physical traits like melanin in skin tone, which ultimately results in skin tone, right? Or any other such factors, that these things vary so much within the same group and are indicators, if anything, of the interracial marriage of different family groups to look at it and go back and say, well, this race it comes from here, comes from this, the only way to justify it, the race as we are sold it. For example, as we saw a couple of weeks ago with that interview done by this Turning Point USA kid with the head of the Klan, was to believe in a narrative that says that 6,000 years ago, God put Adam and Eve in a garden and told them not to eat a fruit from a tree. And then as a result, a couple thousand years later, a guy named Noah and his sons end up on a boat, and they are the ancestors of every living person in the world. 6,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago in the case of Noah. When we have archaeology for cultures that predate that culture, any such culture from that time period by 10, 15, 20,000 years, it shouldn't even, it becomes very clear to say, and especially with the human genome in all of its beautiful diversity that we can see now, can see that the very concept of race, as it is sold to us by these races, requires God and the Bible or some holy book or some myth, some false narrative in order to sell it to us. And it is ultimately this distorted perspective of race is only makes sense, as we saw with Simon Webb. Simon Webb here a moment ago. And as you will see, if you listen to Matt Walsh's content, as he delivers it, not just in this episode, but throughout all of his work, that all comes back to God, that he believes in God. Not all people who believe in God are racist, but all people who are racist that I know of either believe in God or they believe in some narrative that's equally as, or more or less, as indefensible. And if there's an atheist out there who sets a different standard for that you can name, I'd be happy to look into their work and to challenge it. Oh, it's interesting, Hyde. Cool. Diana, I'm looking at the comments for the first time in a while. Diana, thanks for being here. Guys, Diana comes in here a lot, and I really am appreciative of her being here. And of course, my good friend Hyde. It's good to see you guys again. We're going to finish up talking about the work. I was thinking I would show you guys our new hymn that I've been working on. So thank you very much. I like this comment a lot, Hyde. Leviticus rules of slavery talk about those born as slaves. That is true. But another thing is that one of the defenses that people who believe in the Bible make for slavery, and it's just ridiculous. There should be no excuse for slavery, whether it's incarcerated slavery. I mean, these are values. These are values that we agree upon because we want to live in a world without slavery, and we don't need any more empirical information, if any empirical information is even available, to value it and say, look, it comes down to this simple logic, some of our values. I am a conscious being. I would hate being a slave. Other people are conscious beings. If those people are anything like me, and chances are they are, I mean, we're all pretty closely related here, and we all have pretty similar experiences. And if they hate being a slave, I would want to know, because I would look at that person. I would at least want to know, does that person hate being a slave? Like, not what have they been trained to say or taught to say or threatened to say? If they could speak for themselves, would they say they hate being a slave? And if they do, and if they would, and if there is no system for finding out, do they hate being a slave? It should be very telling that the motive of whoever's making those rules for them is to make sure that nobody tries to liberate them. That is the reason why slavery had to end. And maybe it is at some point a value as fundamentally American in ideology, or as fundamentally modern in its ideology, or what have you, as religious values for people who believe in God are for them. And maybe it isn't just borne out by empirical evidence, but not all things, when it comes to our values, not all our values are borne out directly first by the evidence. They're borne out oftentimes purely from the intuition of people. That's why people say, well, you as an atheist, you place no value in intuition. It's not true at all. Our spiritual life, our inner life, instructs us. Even religious people. People say, well, I wouldn't have any kind of values if it weren't for God. That's not true, because there is no God, yet you have values. Your religious values, people who have religious values of human beings should be studied, because they may intuit some important, valuable things. Dr. King was Christian. We listened to Kai Schwimmer, was it just 2 weeks ago, ranting about how Dr. King shouldn't have a day named after him, or shouldn't have his birthday celebrated, he claimed, because Dr. King practiced a low Christology. Okay, by which you mean, I've mentioned this many times, by the way. One of my favorite things I learned about Dr. King, I learned in high school, because I read the letter from Birmingham jail when I was in high school for my speech and debate courses, and was greatly impressed by Dr. King. And not just because he was a civil rights leader, but because of the things he had to say. And I had read an essay he wrote in college, in divinity school, in which he compared Christianity to the pagan traditions of the dying and rising gods in the Mediterranean at the time, which was well known by that time. And he wasn't breaking new ground. He was writing a paper. He was assigned to write a paper, so he wrote a paper. And the paper that he wrote was about how there were Christs before Jesus Christ, which any person, Richard Carrier can tell you all about that. You'll find that all in his books. Hell, you'll find that in any theologian, any person who writes about that time period. Bart Ehrman writes about this. Christians have been writing about this for years. Of course, not in a way that the general public is seeing, but that, talking amongst scholars to say, at some point we're going to have to deal with this, that there were dying and rising gods before Jesus. And if you look at these dying and rising gods, you see 12 apostles, you see December the 25th, you see boom, 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 boom. Everything about Jesus came before. It is just that Jesus was assembled from the traditions of a Jewish Messiah, certainly, but also from Jewish angelology, as we see with the studies of Philo of Alexandria, in the writings of Philo of Alexandria, as we can see in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Jesus is not new. Jesus came from all these various traditions, were amalgamated and treated as if it was new. It was not new. In any event, all that Dr. King did was to say, it's significant that the story of Jesus was circulating throughout the Mediterranean at the time, including, when you say Mediterranean, you don't say Mediterranean without meaning Africa. Is it significant that one of the most significant leaders of the civil rights movement for African Americans, but not just for African Americans, not just for Black people, but for all BIPOC, for all Black and Indigenous people of color, was a man who studied in school and discovered that if you want to talk about Jesus, a Jesus he worshipped, a Jesus he adored, a Jesus that he taught other people about, that he preached to people about from the pulpit, because that was his job, that he knew that same Jesus was not unique. And yet, if you ask me, did Dr. King have faith? As far as I can tell, yes. If Dr. King was an atheist, I want to be the first person to find out. I love it. I would love to be able to say Dr. King was only a Christian on paper. I'd love to say that this brilliant man was an atheist like me. As far as I can tell, it's not true. That's me being intellectually honest. Anyway, now I've ranted. I've officially ranted. So you're welcome. I want to tell you guys a little bit about the news of what's coming up here. Barring any kind of strangeness happening, and I won't speculate on the strangeness. Today is, well, I guess now it's officially Saturday. the 31st of January. On February 1st at 10 a.m., I am going to broadcast the first street sermon I have done in a while from the streets of Salt Lake City. I will be posting on the Facebook page and on corehor.org. Where else would it? Normally that's where we post everything. The exact location I'm not going to publish until the morning. If you happen to be in Salt Lake City and want to see a godless sermon in person, look at corehor.org. I'd be happy to see your shining happy faces as I go and preach on the sidewalks of Salt Lake City at 10 a.m. this Sunday. And I'm going to be teaching about them. I'm going to be preaching, let's say it has to do with the morals of immigration. And that's what I want. So that's one announcement. If you didn't see it before, I want you guys to be able to see now. There is going to be also on February 22nd. I want to take a moment actually to acknowledge on this. On February 22nd, starting at 11 a.m., doors opening at 11 a.m., in St. George, Utah, there's going to be an event that we're calling the Space After. It is going to be a space where people can practice one of our godless ceremonies, the reclaim, and where you'll be able to see some of my artwork in person and even place purchases for for prints of my artwork and of several other artists who have donated. And I'm going to not cry. Many of them close associates of mine, including my dear family members, and some of them people who have just barely heard about our work and generously gave of their art to be donated for this event. We haven't gotten the official word from the organization that we can promote ourselves as being officially connected to them yet, but whether officially or unofficially, the funds from the purchases of prints and from the silent auction, because you will be able to auction original works, including mine. The funds that we will be raising will all go to an organization called Cherish Families in Colorado City. If you don't know, after Warren Jeffs was arrested, the polygamist Warren Jeffs and the cult leader of the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints was arrested, his wives and the wives of all of these polygamous men and their children in this community who were already living under a system of oppression. I met several people from that community and even interviewed one at length for my documentary about Mormons and sex. The boys particularly are kept uneducated to keep them from being able to rise up against the cult leaders. And they are forced into manual labor at an early age. And if they rise in the society at all, it is only because of their connections to the prophets and to the apostles in the FLDS church. And the girls also are kept uneducated. They are kept and forced in a basically a brainwashed circumstance of believing that they exist only for the purposes of reproduction, which is consistent with the same doctrine that every LDS girl is raised to believe. I'm saying that from experience, not because I was an LDS girl, but because I have loved so many women in my life who were, and not just in that way. Come on, guys. And this community, the people I have been moved since I came to St. George, because, I'm based out of St. George, at least part-time. On the 25th, by the way, of next month of February, I'm going back to Virginia and starting up operations on the East Coast again. While I am here, I have met multiple people who have been connected into that community because it is so nearby. When we went and took blankets and hygiene kits to Cherish Families in Colorado City a couple weeks ago, we drove less than 40 minutes, my sister and I, and 40, 45 minutes from St. George. It was not far. And we got there, uh, and I listened as she told me about the people she knew in this community. I met some people in the community there at Cherished Families. Were beautiful, wonderful people, brilliant people. And I have met many people since then, and we've had people in comments here in the Church of Korihor. This is part of the reason why I took an interest in this and we started doing this work. The more you meet these people who were affected by Warren Jeffs, who were, you know, abused by Warren Jeffs and Rulon Jeffs and the polygamists, the Mormon polygamists, the more you realize how true it is what we've said before, what I've said before, which is that Mormon polygamy is trafficking. That's what it is. It's meant to traffic people. These people are survivors of human trafficking, even survivors of sex trafficking. And the fact that the community that is there, the women particularly, who are organizing these, who have organized therapy for these people, housing for these people, training in financial, what's the word I'm looking for? Financial education for these people, not just the women, but their children. The women who are primarily running these organizations are former polygamous women and their daughters. And the hoops they've had to jump through to get the financing that they need and to get the materials that they need, it's startling, frankly. And right now in this region, what few federal resources did exist a year ago have dried up. And resources for women and children who are victims of domestic violence have become extremely scarce and difficult to come by. In a very real way, the Church of Korihor is one of few organizations that's actually out here trying to help. Is our little godless church, people meeting on the internet at least once a week. Bunch of godless people that everybody laughs at, even people who are friends of ours, and we love it when they do. Well, when they do it in a good-natured way. We change lives here. And the Church of Korihor, it says that we are godless people on a mission. That's not tongue-in-cheek. People can laugh at it. My first godless sermon I gave, we're going home, I said, look, people laugh. People will laugh at the Church of Korihor. I love it that they do, because then they don't expect it. When we come at them sideways and say, you know what, though? How many blankets did you take out to the unsheltered? Versus how much money did your church bring in the offering plate? How many people are freezing on the streets of Salt Lake City while the Mormon church rebuilds all of its extensive assets, including a shopping mall, including a giant conference center they can hardly fill, including building temples all over the country and all over the world for services that nobody is attending? And all that money being perpetuated, the millions of dollars they've had to pay in fines to the federal government for having lied to their own members, saying that they weren't using their tithing money to gamble on the stock market, and they outright knew it was a lie. You know, when you leave the Mormon church, one of the most startling things that you find when you're supporting people who leave the church, and I love my fellow ex-Mormons, I love you all dearly, is how many people will say, do you really think the brethren know that it's all bullshit? I mean, how many do they know? Do they know? Of course they fucking know. Of course they know. We saw that with Ensign Peak Advisors. There wasn't a member of the Big 15 didn't know. They were stealing tithing money and gambling it on the stock market. They were doing it for decades. And they were doing it behind closed doors and reinvesting in a real estate scheme that was sold to the world as we're building temples to bring people into eternal families forever. It was BS the whole time. And meanwhile, how many people were freezing to death on the streets of Salt Lake City? How many people could have been housed in housing first initiatives built where those temples were built? How many people could have been educated in universities? How many Brigham Young universities would there be all over the world if the Mormon Church placed as much value in the education of people, of human beings, and lifting people out of a desperate circumstance as they do in taking advantage of their own believers and taking their money and using it to gamble? This is what church has become in this world. And meanwhile, the Church of Korihor is out here talking about how somebody named Chris, and I love you, Chris, whoever you are. I have a few Chris's out there, and I suspect this is probably one I don't know. Went to an Amazon list on our website and ordered 25 emergency blankets. Use the right finger here. For me to go and take to people on the streets of Salt Lake City this Sunday. I'm doing it. This work is happening for godless people on a mission. And I love it. I love what we're doing. If you can give something, even if it's just $1, guys, please go to korihor.org, click on the give button, and help us out. If nothing else, it's good for your spiritual development. Don't believe me? Give it a try. You guys want to hear a new hymn? I've done enough preaching at you. It's not even Sunday. I want to share with you guys a new hymn. I'm going to remove this racist from my screen. Ugh. Do you feel dirty after we do some reporting about racist people? Ugh. Every week I've been doing it. I think it's important to do, but every week I go, I hate this. Let's change it. It's time to change. I want to share with you guys. I had done a training video on how to use Suno, and after to make a godless hymn. And afterwards, I figured out that it was only recording my voice; it wasn't recording the song, and the whole training was useless. In any event, but the song that it made was so impressive that I had made laboring pretty much all day on it today. I love it so much. I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and download the Suno video of that and share it tonight on Charlatans Never Change. I'm very excited to share it with you. And then, okay, make sure that you keep your eyes peeled. This weekend, we're going to start advertising. Well, technically, you'll find on the Korihor, on the Church of Korihor's website or Facebook page, you'll find the link to the Eventbrite for the February 22nd event, the Space After. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention Megan Connor is going to be there, and she is going to sing for us and present some songs. You know, Megan Connor, everybody knows her because she is a true crime podcaster who happens to be related to Lori Vallow, poor thing. But really what she is an opera singer. She's a classically trained opera singer. I said to her, is there any chance you would ever agree to sing for the Church of Korihor for a good cause, for charity? And she said, yes. I said, good, February 22nd, after Thrive. If you don't know, February 22nd at noon is when Thrive St. George ends here in St. George, and we're going to be in the hotel right next door. You didn't hear it here. We haven't talked to them about it. We don't need to talk to them about it. It's a free country. Anyway, and I'm going to be at Thrive, and I'm looking forward to it. If you're going to be at Thrive St. George, come say hi. And frankly, come and do the reclaim. I'm really excited about it. And come hear Megan Connor sing. We're trying to get as many RSVPs as possible. It is free to attend. If you want to donate, you can donate there. You can also purchase art and have something that you can take home with you. And every time somebody looks at it and says, "What is that amazing piece of art?" you can say, "Oh, I met the artist. I know the artist who painted that or made that. My nephew, my dear beloved nephew Michael, donated some pottery. He makes pottery, and you'll be able to point to it and say, the money I used to purchase that went to helping victims of Mormon polygamy in Utah." And it's going to be pretty special. I present to you our newest godless hymn, Love's Labor Lost, whether in person or online. I'll see your asses on Sunday morning for church. Whores, get your ass to church.
You drive me crazy, baby.
Whoops. This is the return to the divorce songs, by the way. This is a hymn for our uncoupling ceremony, which on February 22nd, I'm going to be making announcements about that too. I can't stop making announcements. I'm out of here. Chill.
You drive me crazy, baby, we're a team. There's no I in there, but I did everything. You clock in and out, I'm on call all day. You're working on you, I'm all work, no play. Breadwinning is hard, yeah, I know that too. I've pulled my own weight, and baby, I'm through, dear sir. By the time you finally read this, please consider it my final notice. Love's labor lost, I'm done, yeah, I'm out. You wanted a slave, that's not what I'm about. I carried all my kids, your ghost, my cross. Here's your last invoice. Was it worth the cost? You wanted a mother, but married a girl. I fell for your charm. Hey, let's give it a whirl. Please be advised, this isn't my job. If it's a mother you need, baby, call your mom. Whisper through this hole you punched in our door. Yeah, baby, come on, sell it to me once more. Love's labor lost, I'm done, yeah, I'm out. You wanted a slave, that's not what I'm about. I carried all my kids, your ghost, my cross. Here's your last invoice. Was it worth the cost? You're free therapist, baby, our time's up. You're free gourmet chef, you've been served, eat up. I'll close the door to your baby factory. In full management, this labor ain't free. Rent's due on the first, the keys are in the lock. I pity the next girl whose labor's lost.